Hey, it's the Profit Answer Man, Rocky Lalvani. If you're new to the podcast, check out my interview with Mike Michalowicz. It's episode number 2. If you want to hear about each chapter in the Profit First book, go back and listen to episodes 3 through 13. Episode 1 is the why and how. On the Profit Answer Man, we learn money mastery without all the complicated accounting mumbo-jumbo using a simple system. Your accountant is busy documenting your transactions and creating a rearview mirror of what happened. My guess is you don't even look at the reports they sent you. If you're like most business owners, you struggle with this, and it's not your fault. We aren't taught money in school, and accountants aren't taught how to be profitable. The Profit First system created by Mike Michalowicz works, and he certified me to help you implement the system in your business. Remember, the new equation is sales minus profit equals expenses. Let's face it, without cash flow, you can't pay your employees, buy needed materials, or pay your mortgage and support your family. I help you to do that and more, so you can focus on the parts of the business you love and receive the rewards for your labor and investment into your business. The stronger you are as a business owner, the more jobs you create, the better we are as a country. Small business owners are the backbone of America, and for that, you deserve to be well rewarded. Just remember, more revenue does not equal more profit. That's why we focus on the bottom line. You've heard me say it before. You want to make more profit with less effort. And that's our theme today. Since 2001, JT has an extreme passion for helping business owners prepare and sell their companies. Resulting from his own entrepreneurial ventures, including 5 startups, he has a solid understanding of what it takes to successfully create, expand, and sell a business at maximum value. With his broad base of knowledge in starting and selling companies, he not only has a clear understanding of what makes businesses saleable, but also is very keen to the requirements of both parties to the transaction. Instinctively, JT has the ability to understand his clients' unvoiced questions and concerns, to anticipate and recognize the needs of both parties, offering a considerable edge during the negotiation process. Let's meet JT and learn from him. Welcome to the Profit Answer Man, JT Kraii. It's great to have you join us today.
Hey, thank you, Rocky. Appreciate being here.
So, can you share a little bit about your background and what you do?
I can. Thank you. I'm a business advisor, an M&A advisor and broker, and I help business owners with their succession planning and their overall exit plan to sell their business and exit into their retirement the best way possible. And how I got into this line of work is a bit interesting. I was an entrepreneur through the 90s and started and sold several of my own companies. The very first company that I sold, Rocky, it was a dismal experience. And I thought, if that's all a broker's going to do, then I can do that. So I handled the next 4 sales on my own, and then I helped some friends sell, and then discovered it was a whole industry out there. So I went to work for a brokerage house in Portland, and it was a really tough experience. Learned a lot about what not to do. A lot of brokers out there will end up lying to potential sellers and business owners just to get them as a client. And it's no way to toy with someone's retirement and their emotions. So everything I do is based on an education and a foundation where a business owner can make a real solid decision. And I believe that's the only way to work with somebody's life work and their big family decisions.
And it's always nice to find good, ethical people who do things correctly, because too often in business, there's a lot of people who aren't. So I like to align myself with those who are. Get some great resources to help our listeners. And I just want to make a comment. It doesn't matter whether you're selling your business or not. I think what you're going to hear today is how you should run your business no matter what, because we never know what life is going to throw at us. So let's dig in a little. You do use Profit First in your business and you recommend it. Can you tell us a little bit about how Profit First has helped you?
I do. Yeah, I came across Profit First maybe about 4.5 years ago, and I was fascinated by it because even though I've been in the business world for 30, 35 years now, it was just too simple, and I could hardly believe that it was going to work. And I decided to put it to the test, and I was fascinated with the simplicity of it and how effective it was. Not so much even the logistics of it. It was the emotional simplicity of where that money is going, not only in an income account, but owner's compensation and tax. And it really took an emotional burden off my wife and I, just wondering when those quarterlies were due and whether there was enough and what were we going to make. You know, as an advisor and broker, my income can be a little sporadic. And so it really just evened out our emotional expectations. And I think that was the biggest hurdle. And when I found how simple it was for me, I ended up, in fact, my very first referral, Rocky, was to a plumbing company in the Midwest. And he had called me a month earlier and indicated just how distraught he and his wife were about their business, and they had thought about shutting it down. They didn't know where the money was going. And I had finished this book and implemented it for myself, and I thought, I've just got to say something. I hesitated. And I told him, I'm going to order you a book. Would you read it? And he said, absolutely. And it got there in a couple days, and he read it in the next couple days and called me a week later. And he said, my wife and I are going to do this. We're a little nervous about it. And as we kept talking over the next month, he literally said, this is the best feedback I've ever received. He said, it has changed our entire life and how we view our business. And I couldn't believe those words because that's a little bit about how I felt, but the magnitude and the depth of which he said it just touched me. And they're just happy as clams now. They can't believe that the money was there all along, and they just had to prioritize it. And so that was my first referral, was probably my best success story.
And, I think this is where people struggle. Number one, it's simple. Simple's never going to work, right? We need to have complicated and fancy systems, and yet people just won't do simple. And yet simple works, just like diet and exercise. Nobody wants to hear that either. It's simple. It works.
Well, and that was my first thought is it can't really be that simple, Rocky. I mean, it's too simple. Somebody must have thought of this before. And I'll tell you, I was really impressed with the effect of something that simple. And because it's so simple to implement, it's simple to refer, it makes it really easy. Even if there are skeptics out there, I would encourage you to try it. I'm just now reading The Profit First for Contractors. And Sean reiterates, just if you're skeptical, just try it. And I'm astonished that it's almost like a little seed that gets planted. If you just try it, you're going to become a believer. So I'm hooked.
And that's the biggest problem. I think a lot of people struggle with the implementation, and I don't know why. The hardest problem for most people is to open the bank accounts. I'm like, it's not that hard to open bank accounts. Why do people struggle with that so much?
It's just the hassle. A lot of business owners, Rocky, and you know this, they can't even see past Friday, let alone, the end of the month or the end of the year. So to get someone to plan and sort of insert one more task into their day, it's a struggle. And I get that. And I think if you prioritize your business and the numbers within, then the bank account is, you're going to carve out that hour to just go get it taken care of.
And that's what you've got to do. You put it on your schedule and you get it done. That's why Profit First works, because it creates that implementation schedule and that rhythm of putting your money where you want it to be and telling it what to do. And it's based on a very old system. So a lot of people, if you talk to their grandparents and so forth, would have envelopes or jars. And when they got their pay, they would take the money and they would divide it up for rent and for utilities and for groceries. And they would put the money where they wanted to spend it. And then they only spent it on that intended purpose because that's what it was for. And when they ran out, they figured out how to make do.
Well, and I think, you're spot on. And I think it's human nature to think that we can beat that system and do it emotionally. But there's nothing like the task of allocating funds to a different account and then knowing that it's there. It's thinking it's all in one account and you've got this ledger, sort of this emotional ledger going on in your head. It's too easy to violate that. It's too easy to cheat. And so to have it in separate accounts, it's the simple and fundamental act of allocating those funds is a win. Every time I allocate funds, and I do it regularly, it's an emotional win. And I think we need that as owners.
You do. And I kind of say it takes the emotions out of everything, but in a sense, maybe not so necessarily. But the good news is tax time comes and you're ready for it. It sounds like that was a problem sometimes in the past.
Not so much for my wife and I, and she does the books for us. But it was always a stressor. I think whether it's payroll tax or income tax, you always think about it. And now it's not even a stressor. It's there. I know it's there. I know it's enough to cover what's needed. And so it's just that disappears from my bandwidth. I don't even have to allocate any emotional energy to it. And that was what I was referring to as one of those emotional wins, that it's just handled, as opposed to wondering if there was going to be enough or if we paid that, did we have enough to go on this trip, or did we have enough to go to that trade show? It was just allocated and taken care of. So emotionally, it didn't even cross my mind.
And that is awesome. And congrats on implementing, and congrats on getting others to implement. And
yeah, thank you.
I know you said that was your best success story. Has anyone ever struggled?
They have. Yeah, there's been a couple of people, a couple of owners. I work with niche contractors all over the country, anything from roofers and plumbers and HVAC and disaster restoration and framers, et cetera. And a lot of times, Rocky, these individuals are not well versed in what I call financial literacy. I ask for P&Ls, I ask for expense reports, and as you know, individuals struggle. And a lot of times, the owners of these companies are not MBAs. They've got very little to none financial training on how to read a financial and what it means. A lot of the guys who are my clients, and most of them are male, they have just grown up making money. They always knew sort of by their gut feel whether there was enough. And even though they're struggling, and I say, hey, you ought to look at this system. It's really too simple, and I think it's really going to help you. They have made it by their gut feel, and it's almost like that's so ingrained. Some have started, and they don't really like the structure. The intuition is to rely on their gut. And so a couple of people have sort of challenged me on it and fought me on it. And who am I to tell them anything different? If that recommendation does not work from my lips, maybe somebody like you, Rocky, you can better explain it. So it's my job to get it in front of them, but I'm not skilled enough in the process or the training of it to actually take them down the road.
And that's why I'm here.
Yeah. I'm so glad we connected, because your service and what you do for business owners, many of them need it and they don't even know it. And that's the wonderful thing.
And I get that. I think one of the biggest things I see in the construction industry is that a lot of times they don't tie their time and costs to a job. And so they don't always know if they're doing things correctly because there's no direct correlation. It's a big pot of money and not this particular job. So knowing whether or not each job is profitable, I think, is extremely important so that you can figure out where the leaks are in your business.
Yeah, you're spot on. It's been the last 8 to 10 years where job costing software has come a long way. And even then, it takes a lot of effort in the office for job costing software to be accurate. It's good data in, good data out. And so if you take job costing serious, the tools are now there where they really weren't 8, 10, 12 years ago. But there's multiple companies now that do a pretty good job if you're willing to put the time in. But you're spot on. It's, as Sean talks about margin and markup, and there's so many things for even a small contractor to learn that are simple things that can make more money, and job costing being one of them.
And I know 2020 was a challenge for the construction industry because one day 2x4s were $2.97, and the next day they were $8.50. And if you didn't make sure that you appropriately went to your customers and said, hey, we've got pricing issues, you might have had a lot of business and a lot of loss.
Correct. Oh, yeah. It was some trades did really well and others really suffered. They couldn't even get on job sites. And so it was a very interesting year all the way around. And for a lot of us, I'm sure. But hopefully we can get or are getting that in the rearview mirror now. And whatever normal looks like moving forward, we can get back to the best parts of normal.
That we are. Little by little, everyone is pivoting and finding their new way. So the other reason I wanted you on was to talk about your expertise. And again, I know that people listening may not be ready to sell their business. It doesn't matter. This makes your business more valuable and more profitable. So you have a program called Broker Excel. Can you share a little bit about what that is and how that works?
Yeah, Broker Excel there's a lot of consolidation going on in the construction fields right now. And there's the best way to say it is that I get calls from clients, Rocky, and they'll say, listen, my competitor just called or an industry buyer just called. They want to sit down and talk. I don't know what to share with them. They told me they're interested in my business. They want P&Ls and tax returns, but I don't know how to move forward. And instantly, that business owner is in reactionary mode the entire time. The potential buyer will ask for things, and the potential seller, may just supply them. And there's no non-disclosures. They react to everything that buyer wants. It is not at all a good way to start a discussion. And my commitment to clients is that I will keep you in the driver's seat. And I do that by first conducting a valuation and an analysis. And I want any business owner to know what they're worth, why they're worth what they are, what's driving the value, where the holes are that we need to plug. Can we make it more sellable? What do we have to market around? If there's any issues in the business, we hit them head on. We've got to disclose, of course, any good, the bad, the ugly. But then we can also reverse engineer some of the valuations. If that business owner says, listen, I really don't want to sell for less than 5 million or 8 million or 10 million, where do I have to be the next few years to sell for that figure? Well, it's not complicated to reverse some of the math and give some pretty defensible guidelines on where they need to be. And so I just want them to make that decision from a point of education and not one of emotion. As we all know, there's too much emotion in some of these decisions. So I really want to work with an educated client. When they get to that point, now we'll fast forward. Let's say a client has gone through that and the phone rings. Now they know what it's worth and why, et cetera, and they can have a real educated discussion. And what the driver wants to do, the buyer wants to do, Rocky, is they want to sort of bump the business owner from the steering wheel over into the passenger seat. And I really want that business owner to keep both hands firmly on the wheel because they're driving their own bus. And so what that Broker Excel program is I package up the company and we get the executive summaries put together in the market offering, because when your phone starts to ring, there's a few magic numbers out there by way of sales and adjusted earnings where your phone will automatically start to ring from potential buyers. And if you're not ready to go, you're then in reactionary mode. And that's, again, it's just not a great place to start. So once you're packaged up, and I typically update packets twice a year, and you're ready to have that conversation. And that seller simply says, listen, I'm not for sale, but my phone rings pretty regularly. Here's a non-disclosure. Here's a summary. Once those are signed and returned, then there's more information to disclose. But they make very clear that they're not for sale, but for the right offer, they might be. And that's a wonderful emotional step for these owners who may consider it, but they're not ready to take the step of full-blown confidential advertising out in the marketplace.
And that makes a lot of sense. So what increases the value of a company?
Well, that's a good question. And it's something I take a lot of pride in as part of my education. Most people, when as an appraiser, and every business owner should understand this, when a business gets appraised, they use adjusted earnings, adjusted EBITDA, or EBITDA itself. They can value a company 4 to 7 different ways. Those are reconciled, and out comes a number. Now, most people will call that an appraisal. And let's say a company is worth $10 million. And what I call a math only. And this $10 million has no idea how hard the owner works, the strength of the management team, any client risk factors, whether the financial trend is going up or down, how clean are the financials, number one. So I look at a set of value drivers. It's a list about 28 items long. There's 15 to 18 that regularly crop up in most construction-related companies, and it's a preliminary due diligence of sorts. Essentially, it's a scorecard on your company, and it's pretty easy to determine what's adding value, what's taking away value, and if you've given yourself, let's say, a 3 to 5 year runway, or maybe even a 10-year runway, it's very laser focused on saying, here's what you're doing right, here's what a buyer's going to like, here's some areas that could be improved, and here's where some red flags are going to be created by the buyer or their lender or maybe their CPA. So let's focus on those areas in the runway that you have given yourself, whether it's 12 months or 10 years. Go to work on those things that can really add value. So there's an array of those, Rocky, and it's probably a whole nother conversation, but I look at 15 or 18 that are pretty consistent in the construction-related companies.
Are there a couple of big ones that people generally get wrong?
Well, it's not that they get wrong, but that's an interesting way to put it, and I actually like the term you used. The biggest one, of course, is a business being wound too tightly around the owner itself. And most owners know that, but also most owners think that their business is special, that their business is different. And at the end of the day, it's probably not. The best case scenario is when an owner is very strategic. Maybe they work 10, 15, 20 hours a week. And it's not that they can't work 30, 35, or 40, but what's difficult is when they're working, let's say, 40, 50 hours a week out in the field, they estimate another 10 or 15 hours a week, and then they're strategic another 10 or 15 hours a week. And pretty soon we've got a 78-hour owner, and you just can't separate the business from that owner. That's probably the biggest mistake that's made out there. And I think what the biggest mistake that I see from 30,000 feet, Rocky, is that very few owners put value on the intangibles and these value drivers that I mentioned. Let's use an example. There can be two companies, both at the $10 million mark, let's say. If one company is doing more things right, and there might be one or two issues to improve on, but overall they're doing a lot of things right, the math tells us it's worth 10 million even. Well, it's probably not worth 10 million. It might be worth 10.5 or 10.8 or even 11. And the next company might be doing a lot of things wrong, or they're struggling, or they just don't know any better. Even though the math tells us it's worth 10 million, you'd never get it. It might be worth 8.5 or 9 or 9.5. And what owners don't realize is you can easily have a 15 to 20% swing or more in a business. So that $10 million business could really be anywhere from 8 or 8.5 to 11 million based on the intangible value of what they find when they pull back the sheets. So we've just got to make sure that some of those things are in order. Most business owners would like a very high price or a premium price for their business, and unless they know what a buyer's going to look at, they're really flying blind until they get to that letter of intent or term sheet. So my intent is to get them that information 6 months to several years earlier, so they can really put themselves in the buyer's shoes and understand how to prep their company for sale.
And so this is probably kind of, it's funny, but a business owner who works less and makes more is going to have a much more valuable business than a business owner who's working hard 80 hours a week and busting his butt in the business.
Correct.
I don't think business owners realize that. The less you work, the more your business is worth.
Correct. And I always say to stay strategic, because I'm not as worried about not working at all or working, you can't exceed 10 or 15 hours. That isn't as important in my world, at least being strategic. Somebody has to be in the office working on the financing, leased vehicles versus owning, the insurance policies, the hiring and the firing. Some of the elements that a lot of the elements, quite frankly, that happen behind the scenes. What we don't want an owner to be doing is all of those things I just mentioned, and of course a dozen more, as well as being out in the field, swinging a hammer or meeting with clients or meeting with subcontractors. They're just spread too thin. And I'd much rather see an owner wear 3 or 4 hats, not 10 to 15, which is what typically happens. But the larger companies, owners, they must learn to delegate. And if not, you're going to put your own ceiling on the size of the company, because you can only grow so much if you're unwilling or unable. And what I mean by unable is some owners just don't have the trust to delegate to a team. So I think I get that request more than anything, is how do I grow? And you've got to be able to delegate and do that effectively.
You can't do it all. So you mentioned earlier that there are sometimes holes within the business. What are some of those holes that you see that can easily be patched?
Some of those holes, I think the biggest one, Rocky, and I'm glad you circled back to this, is what I call kitchen table accounting. And when any buyer comes to a business, whether it's a $500,000 business or 20, 25 million, the books have to be clean. There's got to be a paper trail on how the money came in, how it came out, how bills got paid. If there's some personal expenses through a business, which we call an add back, there has to be a paper trail for that. And when I break down a set of P&Ls and I start asking questions about those numbers, there has to be answers. And I tend to ask a lot of questions, because that's what a buyer is going to do. And the business owner needs to be able to get their head around the type of question that's going to be asked. And because you think it's a great business, you being a business owner, doesn't mean the buyer automatically feels that. We have to prove to them that it is. And so typically it starts with a set of books that are clean, hopefully trending the right way. Doesn't have to be, but it ideally it would be trending the right way. And that it makes sense, because if the numbers don't make sense, there's nothing else in the business that's even required, because a buyer's not going to stick around to find out. So I would start beyond kitchen table accounting. And so many people have their spouses or significant other doing the books, and they were not trained. And the difference between a mid-year P&L, let's say, and a year-end P&L, something that's been looked at and reconciled by a CPA, they're night and day difference. And the CPA can only do so much. So we've got to get in a qualified bookkeeper, a qualified CPA to enter the data correctly to have it make sense.
And you said qualified, and I tell you, this is a kind of the dirty little secret of what's out there. Not all bookkeepers and accountants and CPAs know what they're doing when it comes to managing your books, unfortunately. Some are much better than others. You have to make sure you have a good one, and one who's not working 80 hours a week, so he has no time to work with you, because that's the other problem.
Correct. And it's interesting to me, Rocky, that there's no standardization or minimal standardization in the construction spaces. You line up, let's say, 100 different construction companies and introduce, if you had 20 CPAs looking at 100 construction companies, I could show you 300 or 400 different ways to do the books. It's amazing that I've had clients with $8 to $10 million companies that don't have any cost of goods. They just don't allocate their expenses that way. And then they'll change accountants, and the next year their expense category goes from 85% expenses to 15% expenses, because now they're allocating a lot of things, materials, subs, etc., to a actual cost of goods. So it's astonishing to me just how varied and widespread the methods are, which also creates confusion. As a buyer, you look at 4 or 5 different companies, you're probably going to look at 4 or 5 different ways to keep the books. And so it's rare that there's an apples to apples comparison. That's the best way to say it.
And that makes sense. So with regards to this, even if someone doesn't want to sell their business, this process and what you're talking about actually makes them more bankable, so that they are more apt to be able to borrow money at reasonable rates from their bank, because they can prove to their banker that they are able to repay those loans.
Well, that is a loaded comment, and I'm frankly, I'm glad you said it. Number one, yes, it makes you very significantly more financeable if you go to the bank for line of credit, et cetera, when your books are in order and everything makes sense. But here's the bigger picture. There's really 3 components to maximizing your business's value. And especially when you've given yourself a runway, any owner, when they give themselves a runway to sell, imagine three circles, three orbits, orbs that are floating out in space. One is personal, one is the business, and one is the market. Okay. And what I see a lot, and I know you do too, I'll work with 60, 65-year-old clients oftentimes, and they're ready to sell, and they're ready, but their business is not. And that's a tough combination. When their business is ready and they can keep it ready, then they can pull the trigger whenever they want to. And so I always encourage, I don't care how long a runway is, let's get your business in order first, because it's one thing I've learned is that business owners are not ready to sell until they are. And it's that simple. Here's a quick example, and it happens several times a year. A business owner will call me and say, I'd love a valuation analysis. I've heard about it. My CPA recommended you. I'd love to get some answers to key questions so my wife and I can decide what we're going to do. And then they say, I'm on a 3 to 5 year plan. We really want to maximize what we're doing. Can you help us out? And I say yes. We go through the process, which takes about a month. I deliver this really meat and potatoes report to them, and they say, great, we're on this 3 to 5 year plan. We'll touch base this fall. And I say, great, fantastic. The next day the phone rings and they say, guess what, JT? My wife and I talked about your report last night. We're ready. We're so tired and burned out. How quickly can you get us out of here? And I say, well, wait a second. Yesterday you were on a 3 to 5 year plan, and now you want it sold by Friday. And that happens time and time again. And that's why I say business owners aren't ready until they are. And getting them to plan is a challenge. And so as long as the business is ready, they get to choose on their terms when to step out. If it's not ready, then when themselves are the only party that's ready and not the business, it's just a difficult combination. Their business is worth significantly less.
You know what's funny? What I hear when business owners implement profit first, they stop becoming tired and they don't mind keeping their business because all of that tiredness and struggle goes away. And all of a sudden their business becomes enjoyable again.
Well, and I think that's driven home in both Profit First and Profit First for contractors. Most owners do not view themselves as the most important employee. They'll take care of everyone else around them, and as it's termed in the books, they get the leftovers. And hopefully there is some leftovers beyond their salary if they're taking one. When you make yourself an important employee with this owner's comp account that you'll be allocating funds to, instantly you know you're being paid at least much closer to what you're worth. Maybe not entirely. You can work up to that. But you're getting paid now for what you're worth or close to it. And that is a big, big boost for these individuals who have taken the scraps and the leftovers for sometimes decades. And all of a sudden you get to feel like a king. And quite frankly, your spouse is probably much happier because now you're making more money. It's good to be king. It is king for a day. At least we can say king for the remainder of your working life. How's that? And Profit First makes that happen.
That it does. If people would like to connect with you, learn more about your programs, chat with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, first, everything, all communication with me is 100% confidential, but the best way to reach me is by email, and that's jt@exitstrategies, and then the digits 360.com.
And I will put that in the show notes to make it easy for people to connect with you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Rocky, thanks so much for having me.
It doesn't matter if you want to sell your business. Being sale ready is just good business sense. Profit First makes you more bankable, more profitable, and more lendable. JT offers a comprehensive review of your business, and if that's of interest to you, reach out to him. I put his contact info in the show notes. Remember, you don't need more resources. You need to be more resourceful. We focus on the bottom line. If you want a done-for-you service, you can have me as your Chief Profitability Officer. Because you have your zone of genius and want to spend your time doing what you love. I only work with a handful of clients, so they get my full attention. I work with business owners who have or are growing to $500,000 to $5 million in revenue. You can use the scheduling link in the show notes to get on my calendar for a good fit conversation to see if I'm the right person to support you and how I can help you. If you want to learn about living the life of your dreams, check out my other podcast, Richer Soul. As we close out, let's repeat the mantra. Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. Have an abundant and profitable week.